Hi guys, Anne McKinnell here. Thanks for joining me. So today we're going to have some fun with textures. I recently released my first texture collection called the Bisbee Texture Collection, and I had a number of people ask me exactly how you go about using these textures. So I decided to make this video to show you how I add the textures to my images and the different things that you can do with them. Alright, so let's have a look. Let's just have a quick look at the textures that are in this Bisbee Texture Collection. So I will just look at the larger image here, and I'm just going to scroll through these so you can have an idea of the textures that we're going to be working with. And these are all textures that I made in and around a city called Bisbee in Arizona, where they do some mining and they mine some very colorful rocks. So this was a great place to make these textures. Okay, so I'm going to switch over here to Photoshop and show you the first image we're going to work with, which is this lovely red flower. And the background is nice and soft. It's quite dark. I like it, but I think it could use a little bit more drama too. So I'm going to try adding a texture to this one. So what I'm going to do is go back to Lightroom, and I'm just going to shrink my Lightroom window here, so that I can easily drag and drop things from Lightroom to Photoshop. So let's see, which one do I want to use? It's fairly dark. I think I want to use a dark one, so I'm going to pick, I think I like this Bisbee 5. So I'm just going to simply drag and drop that over here. All right, and there it is, and now I just click the checkbox to lock that into place. All right, so right now, you can see it's in the layer stack and it's at a normal blend mode. So we're seeing this full texture in its normal mode 100%. The first step that I usually take here is to change this blend mode to make it blend in with the layer underneath it. So I'm going to click this drop down box, and when I go to add textures, I usually choose multiply or overlay or soft light. And I usually just, pick the one that I like the best. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason how they work. Usually it's overlay or soft light I find with these textures. So I think I like the way soft light looks, so I'm going to pick that one. And now what you can do at this point is, if you think this is too much, you can change the opacity. So I'm going to click this opacity, and I can just move this slider down to make this whole layer more transparent so that you get less of the texture showing. I kind of like this one at 100% though, so I'm just going to leave this at 100% for now. Okay, so I really like how this looks on the background, but I don't like how it looks on the flower. I'm just going to turn this layer off and on again so you can see the difference. So what I'm going to do now as my next step is to add a layer mask, and that will let me define exactly where I want this texture to be on the image. So I'm going to go down here below the layer stack, and I click this button right here to add a layer mask to this layer. So you can see the layer mask is white, and that means that the entire layer is displaying. So what you do is you paint on this layer with black anywhere that you don't want this layer to show through. Okay, so I kind of like to think of it as black is kind of like poking a hole through it so that you can see the layer below. So what I'm going to do is take my brush tool, I'm on my brush tool, and I'm going to make the opacity of my brush 100% to start. And I'm going to make sure my color is black, which it is. And so I'm just going to start painting around the center here a little bit like this. Okay, so that's 100%. Okay. And you can see on the layer mask where I've painted here. So now what I'm going to do as I get closer to the edges of this flower, I'm going to reduce the size of my brush, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of my brush, and that helps everything just blend together really nicely. So I'm going to go down to, let's say 70%. Okay, and now I'm just going to start painting on a little bit more where I don't want the texture to be. Like so. And when you don't have the opacity of the brush all the way up, then you can, brush more than once in the same spot until you get it just the way you want it to be. And I think I'm going to take it off over here too. And again, reduce the size of my brush, reduce the opacity to maybe 30%. And I'm going to go over some of this a little bit here. And now I'll turn this layer. Actually, what I'm going to do is turn the mask on and off so I can see the result of what I've done. So I right click on the mask and I go disable layer mask. And then I can right click again and go enable layer mask, and you can see the difference there. And I can turn the whole layer off and make sure that I've covered up that texture everywhere I don't want it. And I can still see it a little bit on these leaves here. I missed these ones. I can turn my opacity of the brush to 20%. I'm using the number keys here to do this. You can see the opacity of the brush is right up here at the top. And if I just go 2 or 3, 4, you can see it changing there. So I just use the keypad to do that quickly. So I'm just click 2. And I'm just going to brush over this a little bit here. And that just makes the transition a little smoother between the parts that have the texture and the parts that don't. Okay, so I think that looks really good. Now, one thing you can do is if you think that this texture is not enough and you're at 100% on this layer, you can duplicate the layer. So I'm going to click on this layer and drag it down here over the new layer icon, and that will duplicate that layer. So now it's twice as much as it used to be, and if that's too much, you can change the opacity of that second one. Okay. So I kind of like it the way it was actually, so I'm going to get rid of that and just leave this soft light layer on the texture at 100%. Okay. Now let's take a look at another one. I'm going to go over to this layer here. So this kind of an image is a really good one for textures. I do like the minimalist feel of this image. I like it just the way it is, but textures is a great way of just adding a completely different effect to an image. And ones where there are boring blue skies are perfect for adding textures. So let me see what I want to do. Now, someone asked me particularly about this image, so I'm going to show you. It was very simple to do. And I'm going to use this Bisbee 4 for this image. So I'm going to click and drag it over here. Okay. Now you can see it's in the wrong orientation. So I'm just going to click the OK for now. And then I am going to use V for the move tool, and I am going to transform this and just rotate it 90 degrees clockwise so it's in the right orientation. And then I'm just going to grab these handles here and drag it up so that it fills the frame. Like so, and click the checkbox. Lock that in place. Okay, so again, I'm going to go over here to the blend mode and choose either overlay or soft light. So soft light doesn't seem like enough. I really like the way overlay looks though. So I'm going to pick overlay. And now let's look at the opacity. I'm just going to go right down so it's off, and then just bring this up. And I think that looks good right about there. See, 75, maybe 70. Yeah, I like that there. Okay. So again, what I'm going to do is remove a bit of this texture where I don't want it. Okay, so I'm going to add a layer mask. I'm going to use my brush tool, and I have a black brush, and I'm going to make the opacity, let's just go with 50% this time. Increase my brush size a little bit, and I'm just going to paint black. Reduce my brush size a little bit here, like that. Okay, maybe a little bit right down in here. You know what, that's not going to work out there. Okay, so when you make a mistake like that, you can just change to the white brush. So I can use the X key and change my foreground color to white and go 100% and just paint that back. Okay, because this is very small, so that's going to look weird if I try to take the texture out right there. But I can maybe take some of the texture out of this little middle part. But I'm going to have to be careful because I want this to blend in nicely. So again, I'm going to use the X key to switch between white and black. So now I'm on black. And maybe I'll just go 30%. And I'm just going to tap this on a little bit. Yep, don't like that. Okay, X. I don't think that's going to work. So you just kind of have to play with it a bit and see what works and what doesn't work. I think it worked well on these leaves on the bottom though, so I'm just going to work on those a little bit more. Switch back to black, go to maybe 10% and just try to take some of the texture out of these areas here, just to make that blend in nicely. Okay, and again I will turn the layer mask, disable the layer mask, and enable the layer mask, and I think that looks nice. I'm going to leave it just like that, so it's actually still on top of the yucca plant at the top, but some of the texture has been removed in these leaves in the bottom. Alright, let's move on to another one. So here I have these birds, sandhill cranes that I photographed in Arizona. Then let's try and add a texture to that. So I'm just going to bring up my Lightroom window and let me see here. I think this Bisbee #1 is going to look nice with this. So I'm going to drag that one over. Okay, and now I'll click the checkbox to lock that in place. And once again, I'm going to change the blend mode. There's overlay. There's soft light. So in this case, I think overlay is a bit too much. Soft light seems to look really nice though. So I'm going to pick soft light. Let me just turn this off and on again while I think about how this looks. So to me, it's too blue. So what I'm going to do in this case, well, first let me take the opacity of this down. Let me just see where I want that opacity to be here. Okay. So I'm going to leave that at here. That looks good, 78%. Still seems to be a bit too blue for me though. So what I want to do is reduce the blue, and you can see the blue is coming from the background layer. So I'm going to click the background layer, and what I'm going to do is decrease the saturation on this layer. Okay, so how you do that is by holding down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard while you click the adjustment layer. You can clip it to the layer below. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to hold down Option on my keyboard, it's Alt on a PC, and create a new adjustment layer, and I'm just going to go Hue Saturation. Now it's going to ask me, use previous layer to create a clipping mask, and I'm going to select that and go OK. So you see how this Hue Saturation layer has a little arrow right here? That means it's clipped to the layer below. So if I had a whole pile of layers in this stack, this adjustment layer is only going to apply to the layer below and not the whole thing. Okay, so what I want to do in this Hue Saturation layer is pick the blues and maybe just desaturate them a little bit. Like that. Okay, because I don't want that blue to too overwhelming. See, that doesn't really look natural. Not that it looks natural with the texture, but I think that that is a better color. Okay. Now, I haven't added my layer mask yet, so I'm going to click this layer, add the layer mask, choose the brush tool, make the opacity of the brush, let's just say 80%, and I'll reduce the size of it a bit, and I'm going to start painting on top of these birds because I don't want the texture on top of the birds. So I'm just going to go like this and start removing the texture by painting black on the layer mask. Okay. Okay, now as I get closer to the edges, I'm going to reduce the size of my brush and I'm going to reduce the opacity of my brush. So I'll go 50%, start brushing along here. I'm going to have a really small brush to go along the neck here. Okay, really want to make sure that there's no texture on top of that eye. So I'm going to go over this area a few times. And really super small brush here to get this beak. Okay. Get the feet out here. A little bit bigger. I'm going to go down here and take the texture off of these feathers. I wonder if you guys can hear that on the video. There's eagles screeching outside. Not sandhill cranes, but bald eagles. Okay, so I'm going to go up here, this one, and do some of these edges. And make sure to do lots on this eye because I really want that eye to stand out still. Okay, like that. Good, now I'm going to turn the layer mask off, disable it by right-clicking on it, and I'm going to go disable. So this is what it looked like when the texture was on top of the birds. And now I'll enable it again, and now the texture has been removed from the birds and it's just on the background. Okay, so that's one of the things that you can do is you can change the hue or saturation of your background layer. You can also change the hue or saturation of the texture, or change the hue saturation of the whole thing. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. Let's see here. Another thing that you can do, of course, is use more than one texture. So let's try that. I'm not sure how that's going to look on this image, but let's just give that a shot and see. So I'll go over here to Lightroom, and maybe I will pick this Bisbee 3, and I'm going to drag that on top of my image. Click the checkbox to lock that in place. And again, go to the blend modes, maybe pick overlay, soft light. Overlay is pretty cool, but it's a bit much, so that's okay though. I'm going to pick overlay, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity of it. So that looks kind of neat. Let me just turn that layer off and on. Maybe I'll turn the opacity down a little bit more. I don't want it to be too much. Off and on. And I can change the one underneath it, off and on, and see if I like them both. I think I do like them both. Now, I do want the same layer mask though. I don't want the texture to be on top of the birds. So it's really easy to copy a layer mask from one layer to another. You just hold down the Option or Alt key on your keyboard, click the layer mask, and drag it up onto the layer that you want to copy it to. So there you go. It's on top of that layer as well. So that's another way to get a unique look, is by using more than one texture. And of course I can go at this point and say I want to change the color of the whole thing. You know, I can go and add a hue saturation adjustment layer and just, you know, start changing this hue slider and change everything. Okay. You can click the colorize button here and go and change the hue of the whole thing. Okay. I don't really like that, so I'm going to get rid of that one. Another thing that you can do if you just want the texture and not the color that's coming from the texture image is you can just remove all the color from that texture. So again, I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key and I'm going to add an adjustment layer. I'll pick Hue Saturation. I'm going to clip it to the layer below. So now everything I do is not going to apply to the whole image, but only the layer underneath this one that it's clipped to with this arrow. So I can just desaturate that. So now you can see when I make this invisible by clicking the eyeball icon, I have got the texture but not the color. And to see the difference, I can turn this hue saturation layer off, and now I have the color and the texture, which I quite like. I think that looks really nice. So now there's one final thing I want to show you. It's a little bit different that you can also do with these textures, and that is instead of using them as an overlay, you can completely replace your background with them and have it to be more of a predominant thing in the frame. I'll show you what I mean here. So let's go over here to this image. I've got this image of a bald eagle that was taken just right out in the estuary in front of where I camped right now. And I really like this image, but as you can see, the background is a little bit swampy, which wouldn't be that bad, but there's the texture of the eagle and the texture in the background, and it's just all kind of too much somehow. I just don't really like the background in this image. So what I decided to do is cut out this eagle and put it on top of one of my textures. We'll see how that looks. So I've already done this because I don't want this tutorial to be about making selections and masks and stuff like that. So, but I'll tell you that you can do this in Photoshop. I prefer to do it in Topaz Remask. Find that a really easy way to make selections and cut out something in your image. Okay, so this is how it originally looked. I'm just going to turn this layer off here, and I'll turn this one on. So this is how it looks after I cut it out. Okay, so then what I did is I dropped in my texture that's called Bisbee 7, and I put that underneath this image of the eagle. Okay, so I'm just going to turn on this layer, and so you can see how this is the full-on texture image, and the eagle image is now sitting on top of that, and it's blending in using the layer mask that I made in Topaz Remask. Okay. So I did think though that this texture was a little bit too colorful for what I have going on here, so I added a hue saturation layer clipped to the texture. So I'll turn that layer on, and that just takes a little bit of the color out. Let's see if I click on that. All I did was saturate the whole texture layer by 20%, desaturate I should say. And then one other thing that you can do, I often find that it needs something to kind of bring it all together and make it blend and look like a proper image. I don't know if that made sense, but doing something like adding a curves layer or adding a hue saturation layer or a filter or something like that on top of everything really helps to blend it all together. In this case, what I did is I used a color lookup. Okay, I'll turn that on so you can see what it looks like. And all you do to do this, let me just turn it off again. I'll click on this top layer and I'll show you. You click on the adjustment layer icon here at the bottom, and I'm just going to pick color lookup. And this is that the thing with the LUT tables. It's a lookup table. So it's going to look up the LUT files, and it's kind of like it's a color profile is really what it is. So you can go scroll through some of these, you know, and see what they look like. Too colorful. Yuck. I think it was this candlelight one that I used before. So I like this, too much though. So I'm going to click on this layer and reduce the opacity of it. You know, maybe something like that. And that kind of just blends the whole thing together with the texture in the background and the eagle image in the foreground. Okay, so just to summarize, what I usually do is bring the texture in on top of my image, change the blend mode, and change the opacity. Then, you can take the color out of the texture by doing a hue saturation layer. You can even transform or flip the texture if you want things to appear a little bit differently than they are. Then you can add a hue saturation layer to the whole thing, or maybe a color lookup, or maybe a photo filter or something like that. There's just a ton of different things that you can do with these. And finally, you can, instead of using them as an overlay, you can use them as a solid background and completely replace the background of your image with one of these textures. Okay, I hope that you found this tutorial helpful, and I'll leave a link in the description below to my Bisbee Texture Collection. All right, cheers. Bye for now.